Welcome, everyone. I am Casey Free Jennings, and I am the director of Girl Rising's U.S. Educator Program. And I've been with Girl Rising since the very outset. And I've been lucky enough to see it evolve through the years. And that's what today is in part about. This unit that Ally, who you meet, created is really part of the evolution of Girl Rising. And I'm so excited to introduce this unit, Discovering the Changemaker Within. But to start with, I'm going to give you just a little bit, and I promise just a very little bit, of background about Girl Rising. And then Ally Nagel will take you through the unit, which, as I said, she designed. So I know, of course, a number of you are familiar with Girl Rising, and many of you have used our resources, but I also know that there's some of you who are new to us. So just a little tiny bit of background. First of all, who we are. Girl Rising is a global nonprofit organization, and we use stories to change the way the world values girls and their education and the way that girls value themselves. And we're here today because we believe, and we've seen, that Girl Rising can be a really powerful resource for educators like you, who want to inspire their students to see beyond their borders, both geographical and cultural, who want their students to understand issues of educational and gender equity, to recognize that they have a story that matters and a voice that deserves to be heard, and that they have personal agency, that they can make change happen for themselves, for their families, for their communities, for the world. I'm going to pause here just for a second, because I want to set our scene by asking you all a quick question, and that is, how many girls do you estimate don't attend school? And you see some options there. Just tell us this is not a test. We're just curious what y'all may think. And you can just put it in the chat or just take a look. What do you think? 5 million, 30 million, 130 million. And let's see, we've got a 30 million up there. 30 million. Any other thoughts? 30, a lot of 30 millions. In fact, it's 130 million, as Anna said there. And of course, that number has been made worse by the pandemic, and there are estimates that at least 10 million additional girls will never go back to school. So that, and the reasons, of course, as some of you know, are many and varied. Child marriage, modern day slavery, gender violence, extreme poverty, religious and cultural tradition, among others. But that's the distressing and the depressing part of it. This side here, what you're seeing in these pictures, that's what Girl Rising is really about. It's about what happens when girls are educated, about how the world becomes healthier and stabler and more prosperous and just better for everyone. And Girl Rising is also about one other thing. It's about how we can all, especially young people, be empowered to make change. So these girls here you're looking at, now, these girls I call the faces of change. These are the girls whose stories we tell in Girl Rising, the stories of resilience and persistence and hope. They're the stories of the Girl Rising film, and they're the stories that are the heart and soul of our educational resources. 4 of their stories, or chapters as we call them, even though they're videos, are included in the unit that we're about to explore. Suma, who's there, is up there in the upper left-hand corner. She was in bonded labor as a child, really a slave, but she was liberated, and once liberated, decided that she would fight for others. And then Roxana is in the lower right-hand corner. Her family are pavement dwellers in Calcutta, India. But she has this amazing imagination that takes her and all of us soaring into this colorful world of flowers and possibilities and a blue monkey. And then there's Mariama. Mariama is in the lower left corner there. She's from Sierra Leone, and as she puts it, she plans to find the solutions to the planet's most vexing problems. And Wadley, the middle on the left, well, you're going to get to see her story in just a few minutes. So now I want to, now we're going to get to Discovering the Changemaker Within and Ally Nagel. Ally is a classroom teacher, was a classroom teacher for 17 years in Newark and then up in Harlem here in New York City. She has recently pivoted and she's now training novice teachers and writing curriculum. I've been lucky enough to know Ali now for several years. She was an early adopter of Grow Rising and might even be the very, very first member of a very special group that I call the Grow Rising Super Teachers. I've had the privilege of watching Ali teach. I've had the privilege of watching Ali's students learn. I've seen how they've responded to her and her materials, including Grow Rising, and it's been a wildly invigorating experience for me. So here we go. I am going to stop sharing my screen and Ali can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. So exciting to see so many people, not just from here locally in the United States, but from around the world. Similar to Casey, I'm going to try to make sure I don't screw up, which I've already done, the slides. But as Casey mentioned, I think I was one of the early adopters of Grow Rising. I had been using Grow Rising in some capacity for about 8 to 9 years. We've used the film and shown the whole film all together in family events, in community events where we've hosted them at our school. But what you're seeing is a few years of fifth graders, which is what I primarily taught for those 17 years, fifth grade reading, engaging in some of our Grow Rising work. Most of our Grow Rising work initially in the classroom started as an extension to an existing unit. So you can see from Noel's little sticker that he has put on his uniform that he says, you know, please ask how people can fight for their freedom and rights. And part of that unit, when we were looking at how people fight for their freedom and rights, included the story of Suma from Nepal, who Casey told you a teeny bit about. Using Suma in our existing unit, you can see here some of the students watching as a whole class, and then 2 young men watching. They were absent, so they wanted to make sure that they got a chance to watch Suma's story as well. It really opened my eyes up. I taught this same reading unit for probably about 15 years in our curriculum. And the addition to Suma's story and some of the Grow Rising stories just brought alive like this engagement and this like renewed excitement. I have to admit that it came around this time of the year where students were becoming great readers and writers, but you know, some of our work could become a teeny bit monotonous. And so the inclusion of Grow Rising and the chapter on Suma really kind of sparked their curiosity. And without fail, every year, I would have a student come the next day after we watched Suma and say, Ms. Nagel, did you know there are more Grow Rising stories? I was looking up last night at home and I watched this one and I watched that one and I watched that one. And so I was, I guess, lucky enough through the pandemic as we transitioned to remote learning to have the opportunity to design a 5-week unit that centered the stories that students learn from the Grow Rising chapters. As Casey mentioned, the unit focused on 4 chapters, video chapters, Suma, Wadley, Roxana, and Mariama. And I have to say that of all the things that changed in my classroom instruction and in education as a whole during the pandemic, the opportunity to teach a full 5-week Grow Rising unit couldn't have come at a better time. I want to give you a little bit of background about how the unit came to be, and then talk about how you can easily either just take the unit exactly as it is and implement it in a classroom, whether it's a reading classroom, a writing classroom, a social studies classroom, an after school program, or one thing we're very proud of is that you can not only just teach it as is, but it's flexible and can be tailored to meet the needs of your students, whether it's the age level, the location, or some of the themes and topics you want to hit on. As we developed this unit, again, to set the stage, my 5th grade students in 2020 and 2021 were totally remote. So I hadn't yet had the opportunity to develop the community that I normally would be able to develop as readers are together in person. And I have to say that when we taught the Girl Rising unit in the early spring of 2021, it really fostered a community within the students and myself, unlike almost any that I have experienced before. And one of the reasons was kind of the key touch tone of the unit is a digital, you'll see today, but can also be printed journal that asks students to reflect upon specific moments, think about the specific Girl Rising stories, but then also start to think about their own lives. I've found that using Girl Rising stories, particularly with 5th graders and 10-year-olds, the design of the unit allows us to engage and learn a little bit about a girl through the video chapters. And then students start to, have conversation, spark some curiosity. And then as they started to learn a little bit more about girls and their stories around the world, they felt a little bit more vulnerable and willing to then start to look at their community and then look at themselves with a different critical lens. And so that's kind of like where the tagline of learning about ourselves as we learn from girls around the world developed. But I want to give you a little quick visual. So here's a snapshot of what some of the resources look like in the unit. I'll talk in more depth about it in a minute, but we have designed for you all a 5-week unit, which can be taught continuously every day for 5 weeks, or it can be broken up into, maybe you teach the first week, come back and teach the second week a few weeks later at the end of a different unit. But then we also have a 2-week option. And so I'll show you a little bit of the differences between the 5-week and the 2-week option. But here's a snapshot of a lesson that is included in both of those 5 and 2-week options. Most of the lessons follow a very similar flow, a do now, some kind of question or reflection to engage the students and prime their thinking. Then kind of a meat of the lesson you can see on the screen. This one would be to watch Mariama's video, the young girl from Sierra Leone. As you can see, or hopefully you can see, there's a link to the Girl Rising video chapter for you. One of the great things about this unit is any resource and any text we talk about using, any outside video clips, any news clips or people that we reference, all of those links are included for you in the units. And then after the meat of the lesson, kind of always close with another journal reflection. You might see that on some of these units, they're designed for roughly a 45-minute period or class. It can be, kind of snipped and tailored a little bit to meet a smaller timeline. Or one of the great things about the opening, the do nows, and then like the journal reflections at the end is they generally lead to a great deal of discussion. And so you can obviously fairly easily be stretched to 60 minutes. Again, just kind of a great testament to you can use the unit as is, or you can make it as flexible for you to meet your needs as possible. I mentioned a little teeny bit about the differences between the 5-week unit and the 2-week unit. Here it is kind of cut and dry for you. Everything that's in the 2-week unit is in the 5-week unit. So the 2-week unit discusses and hits on themes of persistence, resilience, allyship, advocacy, being a change maker, discovering your voice, and then ultimately like sharing your own story. As a reading teacher, we tried to center most of the unit around themes that had come up in my classroom already, or that were going to come up either in later 5th grade units or even 6th grade and 7th grade units. These are the ones that are kind of written and built throughout the unit. But again, You can make additional changes or revisions to fit your classroom, your subject area. The unit does cover just 4 of the stories in the Girl Rising film: Wadley, Suma, Roxana, and Mariama. Part of the reason I selected these 4 is, although many of my students have watched the whole film either on their own or in some of our community events, these ones seemed the most relevant to my 5th grade students and middle school students. But they can easily be switched out with other videos from the Girl Rising kind of canon, if it meets the needs of your students and where you might be. There is, as you saw a teeny bit of, a digital, but can be printed, journal with prompts focused on reflecting on your own self and the individual, your community, and then global reflections. I think I have found that in this kind of ever-changing school year, even now, many of my colleagues and friends have really loved having this Girl Rising material ready to go, as some of them shifted from in-person learning to remote learning at a relatively quick pace over the last few weeks. They kind of paused what they were doing in person and were able to start some of the Girl Rising work because they already had everything for the remote world ready to go. There are in both units some links to instructional videos that, since I was teaching it remotely from my living room, that show me modeling some explicit reading strategies with the Girl Rising text. So if you are looking for some inspiration or ideas about how you can embed more kind of direct reading strategies as opposed to focusing on content, that's a great way to do it. And there is a pre and post survey. It was really great to administer a pre and post survey in this unit just to gather students' ideas on girls' education, like what it means to be a change maker, and there were some questions, again, for my 10-year-olds that said, like, can a 10-year-old change the course of history or change the world? And I think at first some kids were like, no way, Miss Nagel. And then after the experience of the units, they thought, like, yeah, I have seen now many examples of people that we have learned about, now people that I've learned about in my community, and they could really envision themselves at 10, 11, 12, having a significant impact on the world around them. So those surveys were really nice to see changes in attitudes, and then what they wanted to learn more about in the coming weeks and months that we had together. So again, all of that is included in the 5-week unit. Obviously, with some more time, we have more opportunity to do an in-depth exploration of some of the themes. This can take a variety of forms. For us, the easiest, and what will be all linked in the resources for you all, are excerpts from the Girl Rising book, as well as additional videos about individuals, movements connected to the weekly themes. Have stories of young kids who protested and walked out surrounding gun violence here in the United States, or a few summers ago, the protests around Black Lives Matter, clips of Greta Thunberg, clips about TED Talks from young students who are inspiring change in their community. All those are linked for you in the resources. And then there is some space in the 5-week unit for some culminating projects. I have to admit, I know that there's maybe a few educators on this call from Quincy, Massachusetts. One of the things I love most about the Girl Rising community is that every time I come to an event or meet another educator, I get to hear what they're doing with Girl Rising in their school. And many of our culminating projects were inspired by educators that I have connected with in Massachusetts. And these projects will give you some ideas about where students can share their takeaways from the unit, and give them a space to develop some calls to action and start to action plan what it means to have a significant impact on the world at a very young age. It's a quick overview of the types of units. And then I wanted to give you a little bit of a peek into the digital journal. Again, this can all be printed, can be printed and digital. And it is the way that the resource is set up. It's very easy to revise, to change, to add your own specific directions, add images, anything of that sort. So the general approach, as you saw earlier in this snapshot of the unit, is this was taken from our SUMA portion, is that first I'm going to ask a general question to the students. In this case, think about how change happens and how people can make change in their community, in their world, in their own lives. I tried to keep them as open as possible, so it's accessible to all of my learners, but also really wanted to stress to them there's no right or wrong answer. I wanted any and all ideas. I found, again, particularly since we were learning remotely when we first started this, it was a great tool for discussion. Kids started to share with one another. Some of my fifth graders talked about change. I've changed my habits before. I know how laws get changed. I'm just changed from elementary school to middle school. So students are able to interpret it however they wanted, which was a benefit for me and the way that I wanted to teach it. You could, of course, narrow it down. So after kind of like an opening question to get us moving and started, we then would watch the Girl Rising chapter, the story. In this case, it would have been Suma's, which you can see there pictured in the middle. And then, like, from my reading teacher heart, I would then ask the students to do a little kind of close reflection on the actual material, in this case, the video. So our students would think more specifically about what they've learned about Suma, starting to talk about, the kind of other lived experience from a place that many couldn't find on the map before we started talking about Suma. And with I connected it to our school credo. So part of our school credo is to change our world and our place within it. And so I asked students, how does Suma's story embody this quote? Again, from my reading teacher heart, I probably would have given them the direction after they started writing of, please make sure to use specific evidence from the video or from our Girl Rising reading about Suma to support your argument. So I'm able to kind of infuse a bit of those reading strategies while students are developing this global knowledge. And then most weeks after they kind of drill down into the Girl Rising story and experience, we then push ourselves to share a little bit more about our own selves and our community. I found that after a week or so, the empathy students started to develop or to nurture was really spectacular. Their vulnerability and their willingness to share with, again, students that they had never met or seen in person was pretty astounding. And then it also started getting everybody to think about what was possible. I think that's one of the beautiful things that Casey mentioned about the Girl Rising stories as a whole is, of course, we're learning about other people's experiences, but they all shift to the optimistic view and what is possible. So the final kind of reflection for this week would have been, if you could change something in your community or the world, what would it be? How would you enact change? And tell us about your plan. Again, one of the beautiful things about these digital journals is you can simply be adding more and more slides. Some of my students would write, pages and pages, slides and slides, and have a very detailed plan about what they wanted to change, whether it was the trash collection or lack thereof on their street in New York City, or bigger issues like the types of books that get to be read in school, or the fact that some people could come back to school during COVID and other people couldn't. So that's kind of the general layout of like a week experience in the unit. I wanted to give you a quick peek at just some additional excerpts from the unit. So as you see on the left-hand side, day 10, comes in Roxana's portion, which is about the 3rd week of the 5-week unit. And there's quite a few more links, some to readings. You can see there's 3 links to some excerpts from the Girl Rising text, and then additional links to videos, TED Talks, and other resources that we have found online. We really hope that the resources from the units not only provide you with enough that you could teach this unit or this experience right away, but that it also starts to give you some ideas of where you might want to take some of the work. For our 5th graders, after watching Roxana's story, where her father is such a great ally and support to her, we talked a bit about the role of men and boys in the lives of girls, not only in Roxana's life, but then started thinking about our own lives. We learned about other people. One, of course, who's featured in the Girl Rising book, Shabana, who started a school in Afghanistan. But I would imagine if you taught older students, middle school or high school, this would be a great way to pivot to talking about gender roles, more broadly, the media portrayal of, of gender and gender roles, not just in our country here in the United States, but throughout the world. I think one of the great things is the unit really allows, we hope that it kind of piques your interest in a number of topics, but then allows you to really take the students' interest and curiosity to a variety, to wherever it might lead you. And then you can make additions and substitutions in the curriculum as you see fit. Right there on the right-hand side of the screen is just a little snapshot of one of the excerpts from Girl Rising, the book, Changing the World One Girl at a Time, by Tanya Lee Stone. So I have included that in the 5-week unit and in some of the 2-week unit lessons. You can definitely use them. We found them super, super helpful and a great addition to some of the videos, but also feel free to substitute and make revisions as needed. We are going to use a little bit of the next few minutes to experience the first portion of both the 5-week and the 2-week unit, which starts with Wadley in Haiti. I like to start with Wadley because as you will find, if you have not watched Wadley's story yet, even if you have, that she quickly becomes a fan favorite. Her spirit is very infectious. And particularly when we were designing this unit as students and staff, and all of us were in the midst of the beginning of a global pandemic, the themes that emerged out of Wadley's story allowed students to make some pretty deep connections and led to some great conversations for our first into the Girl Rising unit. So before we jump into the film, here is the first reflection I would offer students in the Wadley week. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so to think about what role school and/or education plays in your life. And I'm going to ask everybody to indulge, just like we would ask our students to. And when you have an answer, doesn't need to be a full-formed paragraph, but what role does school and/or education play in your life? Can you go ahead and start answering that question in the chat?
I'll go. So growing up, my mother taught me like a lot of things in terms of like education. It's not really more so of like how you get it. It's thinking smarter and harder and how to obtain the highest level of education. And I feel like with education, with you knowing things, you kind of have a push or an edge towards who you are and yourself, and less of people taking advantage of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's like you shared the perfect personal experience. I can, like myself, even find so many connections between your story and Wadley's story that we're about to see. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Just as a quick note, I know that there are folks who might be teaching high school or looking for older students. Generally, before I would screen any of the Girl Rising chapters, I would provide students with this kind of framework of, while they're watching, things I wanted them to gather. Again, in 5th grade, I wanted them to look for information they learned from Wadley's story. Again, very broad. I want any and all information. Questions they are wondering about Wadley's story and life in Haiti. And then any connections to themselves and their lives. If you're working with older students and you want to narrow in on a specific theme, you are wanting them to think about natural disasters or even just the geography of Haiti. Perhaps they're learning about the history of Haiti. You can kind of tailor the focus of what you want them to capture or think about as they are watching. But if you have never, well, even if you have seen Wadley's before, I would love it as we share the next 13 or so minutes watching Wadley's story. If you could jot down any information you're learning, if you're visiting it again, you're always going to grab some new information, questions that you're wondering, and then any connections to your life.
Here's the hard truth. In spite of the fact that educating a girl may be the highest return investment available in the developing world, millions of girls just aren't making it. Right now, there are 130 million girls between the ages of 6 and 17 out of school, and hundreds of millions more who struggle every day to simply remain where they belong, in a classroom.
The morning of January 12th, 2010, was bright and beautiful in a way that Wadley could not remember any other morning ever having been before. It was the dry season, when wild flowers bloomed, and flowers that bloomed on their own, without rain, fascinated some little girls. It made impossible things seem possible, unachievable things appear doable. And the flowers, the hibiscus, the azaleas, the bougainvilleas, they all looked even brighter when Wadley was happy.
Wadley, sonnerie, papa est pour l'école.
That morning, Wadley was working to memorize Toussaint Louverture's final speech as he was removed from Haiti by the French after he tried to win independence for the country. Wadley liked to imagine herself defiant, like brave Toussaint Louverture. But she also wished she had been given some words by women to recite. Brave and strong women, like her mother.
Wadley, yourself, Chico Sifi.
Every day, Wadley brought 2 snacks from her mother's tray, one for herself and one for another child. That day, she chose a new friend, Shelda, a girl whose father had been killed the week before. He was a taxi driver, and someone had gotten into his car with a gun and asked him to get out. He had refused, and the person had shot him. Soon the moment came for Wadley and her classmates to recite their quotes from the history lesson.
Alexandra.
Wadley watched as some of her friends recited or failed to recite. Their stammers, stutters, and hesitations seemed to her like a long poem, a love poem to history.
Que le trône de l'or. Wadley.
En me renversant, on a abattu à Saint-Domingue que le temps de la liberté de Noir. Tout sera des racines, parce qu'elles sont profondes et nombreuses.
That afternoon, all Wadley could think was it was the dry season when wildflowers bloomed. And these words seemed a perfect beginning for her composition and a fitting bookend to her day, for they seemed to emerge somehow out of the dream that she had been having that morning. Wadley could not remember how she and her mother got to the open field near the university. It was still the dry season, but wildflowers no longer bloomed. In the tent camp, she often heard the most dazed of the adults say, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust." This they said when they were finally resigned to the fact that their missing loved ones would never be coming back. Life tried to return to normal, except now her mother roamed the city during the day, looking for friends and family from whom to seek help. And instead of school, Wadley went to the water fountain with a bucket. Every day now, as she passed through the camp and the ruins of her neighborhood, she thought about school. Sometimes, as she walked by the rubble of the school itself, she thought she heard the voices of her friends reciting the lessons that she now missed so much.
Ça te passe au Wadley?
L'école a ouvert.
On connaît. Cherchez de l'eau pour moi, s'il vous plaît, Wadley.
L'école ouvre, je vais à l'école.
Parce que je n'ai pas l'argent.
Money was still not completely clear to Wadley. She knew that there was never enough of it, that some people had more of it than others, and that it determined in many cases how people looked at you and talked to you and treated you. It was the reason some people ate 3 meals every day, while others ate every couple of days. It was why, she was learning now, that some kids went to school and others did not.
Wadley, bye-bye, à plus tard.
Bye bye, Mom.
The next morning, Wadley decided that she would go to school and sit on the bench in front of Madame Roy along with the others. No matter that there was no money, that's what she would do.
Madam.
Bonjour les enfants, c'est vous.
Madam.
Où l'école ici, hein?
For a moment, Wadley wondered how Madame Roy could not recognize her. But, remembered Wadley, the earthquake had twisted a lot of people's minds. Many people did not even recognize themselves anymore.
Oui, madame, c'est l'heure pour venir ici.
Moi, je connais Wadley. Mais en réalité, ça c'est nouveau l'école. Maman paye moi l'école là déjà?
Non, pas de cop.
Moi, bien regrette ça. Mais obligé à la ka Wadley. Léo ka paye Wadley.
Wadley decided that even though money could do many things, it was also a curse, because only a cursed thing could keep her out of school. But she was not cursed. Hadn't she been hearing from her mother and the others in the tent camp that those who had survived the earthquake were blessed? Surely it meant that she was supposed to do something special. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, she thought to herself. The next morning, Wadley started for the tent school again. She wasn't sure what she was going to do, but she was determined to go and stay.
Est-ce que maman paye l'école là pour déjà, Wadley? Est-ce que maman paye l'école là pour déjà?
Non,
Est-ce que tu as déplacé la Wadley?
non,
Voilà, ka Wadley.
non.
C'est la dernière fois que je dis ça.
À tout toi pour me tourner, m'a toujours qu'à fini jusqu'à pas m'arrêter.
Sorti là.
À tout toi pour me tourner, m'a toujours qu'à fini jusqu'à se m'arrêter.
And the flowers, the hibiscus, the azaleas, the bougainvilleas, they all looked even brighter when Wadley was happy. They even seemed to thrive from it.
If that was your first time seeing Wadley's story, I hope your educator brains are like quickly thinking of all the ways you could use that story in your own classroom. I have probably watched that clip 100 times. And when she says, if you send me away, I will come back and tell you, let me say, I mean, I've definitely cried in front of 5th graders watching that film multiple times. And then the thing I love the most is just when she grabs her little friend's hand under the table. So as I get ready to share my screen again, I want to be conscious of our time, but also to share with you a bit more of what would happen after. So I would revisit our note-taking device and ask students, just unlike that what I just did with you, sharing all my favorite parts, I would have some self-control and not do that with my students, so that I could hear what they held on to, what they noticed. And all of the questions that came about could stem from, why do people have to walk to get water? Or sometimes I would have to be a bit more explicit with students about the earthquake that happened, because some of them didn't quite understand what had happened in the film. And a number of kids would even get quite scared when the earthquake scenes happened. I would imagine that if you were teaching a history or a geography or a humanities class, you could talk a little bit about Haiti and their fight for independence, or colonialism. Some kids picked up on the connections to themselves in their lives, the fact that Wadley speaks more than one language, they speak more than one language. And so we have each had interesting conversations with fifth graders about why French is spoken in Haiti. And so as you can see, these Girl Rising chapters lead to a great deal of deeper conversation and connections. I would finish this work up with like almost a quick check for understanding for students' almost literal comprehension of the film, and ask them why they think attending school was so important to Wadley following the earthquake. You could start thinking about that and entering it in the chat, but I will, for the sake of time, share with you some of the reasons students have come up with. The fact that she wanted to go back to school so life felt more normal. She wanted to see her friends. She loved learning and she wanted to learn more about school. And again, since this is the first exposure in this unit, because of the time and the current events that were happening in my students' life, it very naturally led to a safe conversation about what it felt like for them to be out of school during COVID, and how for some people that was a blessing, and for some people it made life and learning a lot harder. And because we had experienced that through the lens of Wadley's life, it just led to some like very natural and deep conversations about the role that school plays in students' lives, not just here in the United States, not just in Haiti after, global disasters, but around the world at all points in time. Due to time, I am going to skip through. We have seen this before, but I just wanted to talk about the opportunity there is to dig into those deeper conversations. This bend in the Girl Rising unit, where we started to think about men and boys supporting and being allies to girls in their quest for education. It led to some really great conversations and introspection in students' lives. It also revealed differences in my students and myself and other people's in the community's cultural backgrounds and the role that women and men play in their cultures. And then finally, it led to conversations about allyship, and we started to think more and opened then my students' eyes up to how they can show up as an ally and what that means. And so all of these are in our digital journal, which can be printed. And because of its nature, once you have a copy of the digital notebook, it's very easy for you to manipulate and revise and make your own. I think I can speak for Casey and for Molly when we say that we are very proud of the unit and its progression and the way that it builds as is. But we are equally as proud of its flexibility and the way that you all can make it work for you. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in the special shout out to our Massachusetts Girl Rising educators, each time I'm connected with Girl Rising folks across the globe, I always walk away with new ideas, new bends to the unit, new ways I want to infuse Girl Rising into my current curriculum. So I hope that as you all take these resources and run with them and make them better, that you promise to share your new and better and more timely work with us, so that we can all continue to grow and learn together as a community, both far and wide.